Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Everyday Defender podcast. Back once again with my friend Koos. We are not in the same country this time, sadly, but we are here for another episode, which we really looking forward to and really hope that you're going to enjoy. Koos, how you doing?
Hey, buddy, how are you doing, man? I miss you being around here in the Netherlands. I miss the impromptu rum tasting, and also you pointing out weird stuff around me in the Netherlands, like all the signs. I cannot unsee them anymore.
Yes, that was a really, really good time. I do say I think I need to make a trip to the Netherlands like a yearly thing, and I've been telling everyone that I think Experts Live is where it's at. Like, you have to get to Experts Live Netherlands at least one time. I think it should be like a goal for everyone to go and attend that conference. And I've been talking to software vendors and people like that going, you know what, Experts Live Netherlands next year, June, you guys need to be there. So
that's a huge compliment to the team over there.
Yeah, no, fun time. And, the team absolutely deserve all the compliments and all the praise they're getting, which is great. So today,
it was a bit unfortunate that we had an issue with the recording last time. So for people who do watch our live stream on YouTube, they might have noticed that I dropped off after a couple of minutes. Let's try not to repeat that in the future.
Yeah, we have 2 working cameras today, so that's good. And we'll make sure for future use, folks, that when we travel, we have 3 cameras with us, so we don't end up losing.
Let me say, I have another reason to pursue you back to the iPhone side again.
Right. Yes. We will blame the Google phone for the lack of camera on Koos in the last recording. But yes, like I said, two fixed cameras today, and some interesting topics for you. So I'm going to take a look at the exchange attributes, source of authority, and how that sort of transfer process works, and talk a little bit about the history of why folks still have Exchange servers on premises today, and maybe this is a good time to start looking at getting rid of those. And then Koos has a familiar topic, I guess, or at least a favorite topic of him that he's going to talk about. Koos, tell us what you're talking about.
Yeah, perhaps I tried forcing it in a little bit even, but no, it's because as you know, and other people might know, I spend a lot of time around Microsoft Sentinel, keeping the log ingestion down and keeping the ingestion bill under control specifically. And I obviously promised multiple times before that this is not going to be the Sentinel show, but whenever some new features pop up, I think I can stray away a little bit from that rule. It's not a Sentinel feature per se, actually 2 specific Azure Monitor features I want to highlight, which help you filter and aggregate logs before they're ingested. So yeah, it's sort of Sentinel, but it's also Azure Monitor in general.
I think it's important stuff, right? Because it helps folks take control of what they're ingesting, and it helps them keep the cost down. Yeah. And I think that those are really important things. So I think everyone loves it when you bring something like this to the show, and looks forward to it. But we'll get to that after we talk about Exchange, which is kind of one of my passions and one of the things I've been working with for some time. And anyone who's kind of been working in that Exchange space for a little while will know that if you're running Exchange hybrid and you have directory synchronization, you have this requirement to run an Exchange on-premises server. Now, I've been talking about this since Exchange 2010 timeframe, and in fact, I went and dug out an old slide deck that I presented at TechEd 2011. Now, bright colors and weird slide deck theme aside, and that was a Microsoft template, so I didn't create it, but it's just interesting that we've been talking about this for 15 years now, right? Where the need to have that on-prem Exchange server for what we call attribute management, right? You've got these Exchange specific attributes. They get synchronized from Active Directory to Entra, and the only real supported way to manage them is to do it on premises using the commandlets, right? So using set distribution group and set mail contact, etc. I've seen a lot of very interesting home-baked solutions that a lot of customers have come up with over the years, using sort of custom code or custom modules that they've built, or even just using ADSI natively. These are all ways to do it, but none of them have really been officially supported, right? There's always only been one way to do it, and that's using the Exchange tools. So this has been a real bugbear for organizations for a long time. You've moved all your mailboxes, but you still have to maintain the server. And we know Exchange is not the easiest thing to patch. It's not the most fun thing to look after and take care of, right? And so folks have been trying to get rid of them for a while. And in 2022, Microsoft kind of had this workaround that they released, which it was with Exchange 2019, the cumulative update 12. And really what it meant was you could install Exchange tools on a domain joined machine, which would then allow you to shut down that last Exchange server. But you couldn't uninstall it. You just had to shut it down. I thought this was like such a kludge, and I never really liked it when customers did that, because if you've got a server running and that thing is part of your patch management process, at least you know what's happening with it, right? You know to patch it when it needs patching. Whether it's easy, difficult, doesn't matter. You know that it needs patching. You know that it's part of your vulnerability scan situations and vulnerability management processes and all of that type of stuff. If you take a server and then you just turn the thing off and it's sitting on a VM somewhere in a data center, it doesn't get the same level of attention and care. So I've never liked that idea of doing that. I've always said to customers, there's a lot we can do to limit the footprint. We can, let's remove all the publishing, right? The thing doesn't need to be published to the internet anymore. It's just running as a server with a management console. Let's just do that.
Did you mention, sorry, Chris, did you mention that the management tools should have been installed on a domain controller or a member server?
No, it's just a domain joined machine. So just a member server.
Machine. I was already worried that people need to interactively log onto a domain controller.
No. Fortunately, that's never been a thing, right? You've never been able to or allowed to really install Exchange.
I misunderstood. Sorry.
No problem. I probably should have said member server instead of domain joined machine. But and so we've had this sort of kludge. But the good news now is that there's been some changes over the last little while that sort of make this process of eliminating the need for that Exchange server a lot easier, right? And it may be time again for folks to look at this. I know a lot of organizations are kind of looking at this, do we upgrade to Exchange Subscription Edition because Exchange 2019 is end of life or coming end of life? There are still some organizations running Exchange 2016. And so they are starting to look at this again going, what do we do with this thing? Well, you know what I think you got to do is look at this and see whether you can actually eliminate that server from your environment. And I guess that's the main topic that I wanted to talk about today was, what are the options available to you, right? And there's actually a couple of ways you could do this. Both of them involve doing what we call a transfer of the source of authority, so the SOA. So we're removing or breaking the source being Active Directory, and we're allowing those attributes to be edited in Entra. And depending on which way you go, you could either have all of your only Exchange attributes be moved. So that's sort of the first way of doing it, is you actually do it specifically for the Exchange attributes, and you do it on per mailbox level. What that allows then is you can then manage that mailbox and those attributes from Exchange Online. So you don't need to do any of the fiddly stuff in Active Directory anymore. What isn't available yet, if you do that, is the write back. So if you make changes to the Entra object, it's not going to get written back to Active Directory just yet, but that's coming in sort of a phase 2 rollout of this feature. And I actually think it is in public preview now. So, probably won't be far off. The other option that you have is essentially the full object source of authority transfer. So you're actually transferring the SOA for the user object itself, not just the Exchange attributes. So obviously the benefits to that is that all of that user object can then be managed in the cloud, and you don't have to manage any of it on-prem, right? And so, there are some good and some bad, I guess, about what you would do. And I've put a pretty large table in the show notes that kind of breaks down the two options and, just the details, right? The specifics of why you would do this. But realistically, at a high level, what ends up happening is, let's say you're at a place now where all your mailboxes are in Exchange Online, so you've got nothing left on-prem. Your MX record, Auto Discover, all of those things are now going to the cloud. So there's no reliance of the on-prem environment anymore. This is where you start, and this is where you want to sort of move that source of authority, right? But you've got to think about this. You've got to do it for the Exchange attributes, so either the mailboxes or the users that you want to manage. But you've also got to do it for groups and mail contacts and other things as well that you might have, right? How do you do that? Well, you figure out, so for mailbox, so mail contacts and groups, you really don't have an option. You only have one way of doing it, and that's a group SOA transfer or a contact SOA transfer. That's the only available sort of option for you. But for mailboxes, as I had said, you've got two ways. You can set this on the mailbox just for those exchange attributes, or you could do it for the whole user object. And to be fair, I can't really think of very many reasons why you wouldn't just do the whole user object, right? If you're going to separate off attributes whereby you can only manage certain of those attributes in the cloud and the rest still need to be managed on-prem, that just seems a little bit sort of funky to me. There's a very large table in some of the Microsoft documentation that I've linked to in the show notes that actually shows every single user attribute, and it shows whether that attribute can be managed cloud or on-prem or wherever. I think this would get really complicated really quickly. So unless you have some very specific requirements around provisioning, or maybe automated provisioning, or maybe you have some upstream system that is actually provisioning things first and then is flowing into Active Directory or something like that. Like, I've not had a use case yet where this makes sense to me, but every environment is different. I would say you probably want to look at the user SOA transfer. That probably makes the most sense. It's the same mechanism that you would use for groups and for contacts. Once you have that stuff transferred, then now all of those attributes are managed fully in the cloud, right? So you still have directory synchronization going on, but the attributes can be managed in the cloud. And at that point, you can actually go and actually decommission Exchange on-prem. You don't need to worry about shutting the server down or running some funky scripts or anything like that. The server can actually be shut down. I think it's important, though, to understand that a lot of environments actually use Exchange on-prem for other purposes as well, right? So I know, I have some customers that have highly restricted environments, or maybe OT environments where, mail flow and stuff like that is very restricted. Exchange on-prem is still a mechanism for relaying email to the outside world. If you have a lot of, multifunction printers and devices and stuff like that, very often Exchange is still used for that, because those print devices don't do TLS auth. They don't know how to authenticate against M365, right? So you have an Exchange relay that is then used to relay those messages to users. Now, technology is evolving. We can send email through APIs these days. We don't have to send it on port 25 SMTP anymore. And these sort of devices and stuff are maturing, but a lot of environments still have, if you have a fleet of 400 or 500 printers all around the world, it's probably easier to relay that through an Exchange server than to manage those configs individually, right?
Yeah. But it's funny to hear that, Chris. I think the last Exchange server I touched was 2016 version. So I've been out of that particular part of IT for a while now. And I remember even back then, we had those issues when the first Office 365 subscriptions came in and the printers did not support a TLS, that there were applications which you can run on a server which could listen to 25 port and then send it over through TLS over to Office 365. It's crazy that this is still a problem nowadays.
It's still an issue. And, legacy apps is another thing, right? There's sometimes applications, they only support POP3, or they only want to do IMAP, or they only want to receive, use some weird protocol that doesn't support. It's not just TLS. Sometimes it's MFA. It doesn't, it can't authenticate MFA. So relays is an important thing. Public folders, legacy public folders are a thing still too. I mean, as much as we hate to admit that they're still around, they're like the old domino databases, right? They live and breathe and exist. It's funny thing is, just slight tangent here, is I bumped into an old customer of mine recently. He came to Sydney and we caught up for dinner. And it's been about 10 years since I did a notes migration project for this customer. And I said, how you guys going? He was like, yep, we still have domino databases. Because, domino databases never go away. You move the mail away, but those applications, those databases, they stick around, right? So for that reason, you may still have an on-prem Exchange server. And then if you have, data residency and journaling, compliance requirements, stuff like that, that may also be a reason. So obviously, if these use cases apply to you, you probably don't want to be shutting off the last Exchange server unless you have a solution for these other things. I think historically these other things have been easier to solve, right? Mail relay is an easier thing to solve. And especially if you're consolidating your licensing and license spend and stuff, maybe you don't want to pay for a server license and an exchange license or what have you to send mail, right? When there are other options available. So think about those things and then sort of have a look at this. But like I said, there's with the two options available to you, I have a sort of a table that breaks down the pros and cons, I guess, or looking at what moves with them, which attributes, what your requirements are from a DERSync perspective, version numbers, stuff like that, RBAC, security role requirements, anything like that. How would you reverse this process, right? That type of stuff. So all of that stuff is in the show notes, and hopefully this gets a few more exchange servers decommissioned. It's very sad for me to have exchange servers be decommissioned, but I think it is time that we start removing these things from the environment now. They've served their purpose, and they really should be decommissioned. So
on the other hand, I'm not sure if this is a discussion that is present in Australia, but here in Europe, we hear a lot of discussions coming up about things like a sovereign cloud, being less dependent on big tech from the United States, for example. Is that a topic which is up for discussion in Australia as well?
I mean, it is a little bit as well. I don't think we're quite as aggressively talking about it as the Europeans are, right? But to be fair, like, you're a Claude user, I'm a Claude user. The government decided last week that we cannot get Fable, right? And so we didn't get Fable, right? And so I think that's a very large wake up call to everyone, including the Aussies, that if we rely on big tech, and that big tech is America's going to do what America's going to do, and maybe we need to. So it's very true, and we can debate the economies of scale and how difficult it can be to compete, because I think there are very real challenges with trying to compete against big tech.
Yeah, of course. I'm not even going into that.
Exactly. That's true, but I do agree, though, that like thinking about these things is important. I know in the very early days of M365, Office 365, and even Azure, we didn't have local data centers here in Australia. We were running that in Singapore, right? Which was really difficult for federal and local government customers, because for them, they can't store data outside of the Aussie borders. And so once Microsoft invested in data centers, Sydney, Melbourne, wherever, made it a lot easier for those conversations to happen. But I think we've forgotten, right? I think in the last 10 years or whatever, we've all forgotten about the fact that we just rely so heavily on these hyperscalers, and our data is where our data is. So
yeah. No, I'm also hearing customers who were on the verge of moving stuff into Azure, who postponed that and are even looking into running things in a private cloud again nowadays, to just have the feeling of that they can actually touch their data, right, in that way.
Yeah.
It's not up to me to decide if that's a good idea or not. I'm just saying that there's an active discussion right now.
No, 100%. And to be fair, I think that we may see more of it as we move forward, right? Yeah. Because especially with AI now, there's so much investment in AI data centers. I wonder if we're going to start seeing unreliability or reliability issues with the data centers because they're oversubscribed and over capacity. We're obviously going to see costs go up, right? We're seeing it already, that the costs associated with hosting is going up. And then, there's the whole thing of like, is my data really my data? When big tech companies they say they don't, but can so easily use our data to train models, and it's a big thing. So no, I can see, and it's data sovereignty might be a topic for an episode all by itself, actually, because I think you guys, what you see in Europe and what we see here is all very different. So,
yeah, that's true. No, interesting to hear that it might be a bigger topic here than it is in Australia.
Yep. So,
okay,
tell us about Azure Monitor.
About data.
Yeah.
It's not really a Sentinel feature per se, but I think everybody who cares about their logging, cares about detection, their SOC, their SIEM, they have probably touched a lot of the Azure Monitor features in the past already when they needed to collect data. And there were actually two announcements, one actually during build and one the week right after. They shipped two new things, and I think they're worth mentioning here in this episode. So, like I said, logs in Azure, I found it a funny a quote from one of the blogs, actually, by Microsoft, which I'll link in the show notes. It mentioned logs in Azure are a fire hose, and you pay by the liter, or actually the gallon. Is it a gallon or a liter in Australia?
Yeah, we a liter here.
Okay. Okay. Well, for the US listeners, a liter is about 1/4 of a gallon. So now you know. So Microsoft concluded in one of the blogs around this feature that teams are ingesting 10 to 20 times more data than they actually queried. And I think that's even much lower in real life, because I've seen endless amounts of traffic logs, for example, stored from firewall appliances. And when I ask the customer, why are you storing that? They say, because compliance. And if I ask which one, and then they say all of them. So it's like they just like to store data and keep data, and they don't even know why they're doing it most of the time. But you're paying a hefty price in some regards. So I'm happy to see that Microsoft is evolving and giving more and more controls and more knobs to turn to get a little bit under control and limit the logs and only store what you actually need. So there actually there were already a couple of features you could use. So, for example, on a log analytics workspace, you were able to do workspace filtering, where you attach a data collection rule, a DCR, to the workspace, and you provide a KQL query in there. And from there, you could say, for example, well, let's say you have sign-in logs and you have multiple tenants, and you only want to store logs from a certain UPN, for example, or you wanted to store storage blob logs, but you only wanted to store the changes and not all the read and attribute read operations, for example. You had to go in to that DCR, the workspace, and put a KQL query in there, which was limited in its functionality. And you had all of those KQL queries for all of those separate tables in one data collection rule. It was actually hard to manage. You had to do it from code or in the portal by redeploying the code from there as an ARM template. It was kind of a hassle. So it's good to see that a couple of things have improved. So first of all, it's the multi-stage transformations. That's actually the first announcement during build. It is in public preview. And this means that the data collection rules now support what they call a processor pipeline. And now you can chain steps in Compose when you do log ingestion from virtual machines in this case. So the processors run client-side on the Azure Monitor agent before the data ever leaves the source machine. And the records you drop never even leave the machine. So you stop paying for them at the source on both egress and on the ingestion part. And Microsoft published some numbers in the blog of how much you can save. Well, everybody who's dealt with this know how noisy this can be. But they have an example for syslog filtering, for example, where they use a certain severity number, where they can filter out only keep the warnings and up and leave all the informational stuff. And that is actually the 94% drop in the title of the blog. I think that's a little bit of a clickbaity title, but I'll come back to that later. And also with performance counter aggregations, I think this is really interesting. A lot of people who have virtual machines and need the performance counters, just enable them. But instead of having a every 15 seconds performance counter log going over the wire, you can roll up to a 5-minute window on the agent, and you throw away 95% of all the entire volume of logs, which is great. And your dashboards only are fine with the 5-minute granularity, probably. So I think this is a real important one.
When you're running this on VMs, this is the LA agent or the what is the other Azure agent
AMA
installed? Yeah.
AMA.
Now, this seems to me very similar to the stuff that you could do, for example, with like Logstash, right? Because Logstash does this type of client-side filtering stuff as well before you ingest, doesn't it?
Well, Logstash is actually maybe more of a log orchestrator, connecting into certain sources, pulling in data, and then sending it out to different
Right.
destinations. And obviously in Logstash, you can also create listeners, for example, a syslog listener. So you send data, raw syslog to the Logstash machine. Logstash is able to manipulate the data, drop and filter, and maybe restructure the data. For example, put it in certain columns, convert it into a JSON format, and then send it out to an API, for example. This is living inside the AMA agent, so the Azure Monitoring agent. So whenever you create a data collection rule where you set a certain filtering action, the AMA agent should be of a certain version. So only the newer versions are supporting this. But then the virtual machine or the AMA agent syncs with that data collection rule, sees, there's some filtering here, and it takes the filter responsibility on its own so that it filters on the machine instead of sending out all the data and dropping it at the workspace level.
Yeah, that's massive for bandwidth consumption and ingest costs and all that kind of stuff. So that's very cool.
Yeah, so they actually have a couple of examples, like, for example, some Windows security events like a logon success and failure. And there they show how you can actually compose the entire log ingestion from that. So yeah, and that is also something I'm emphasizing with my customers as well. If you're not using the logs for your detections, then those logs shouldn't probably be in the expensive Sentinel analytic tables in the first place. There are obviously a lot of reasons to store logs for different reasons. Especially in Europe, we have what we call NIS2, which is a regulatory compliance law, actually, for 2 years already, where we actually have the company's leadership directly and personally responsible for any cyber attacks caused by within that company, caused by ignoring a lot of cybersecurity guidelines. The other announcement is on not specifically on AMA agent in virtual machines and filtering. It's not even filtering. Well, it's also partly filtering. That's why I coupled them together in this episode. But it is related to the resource logs in Azure. So, well, you've managed your fair share of Azure resources in the past, Chris. You know that they all support diagnostic logging. And within diagnostic logging, you can store it in blob storage or log analytics, for example. And I also see customers enable this on large scales. You've probably also seen log analytics workspaces floating around with massive amounts of data. Nobody really knows what's in there.
I've caused many of those myself as well.
I can imagine. Yeah, so before it was more like an on or off switch type of thing, the whole diagnostic logs stuff. Luckily, Microsoft moved already into resource-specific tables a while ago, which isn't fully completed, actually. I saw in the documentation. I was surprised to see that. But for example, before, let's say, a key vault or a storage account, when you enabled the diagnostic logs, it stored everything in the Azure Diagnostics table. So both Key Vault and storage account and all the other stuff were just cobbled together in one table. Well, first of all, that table does not support data lake functionality, so you cannot store it in cheaper storage. And it was really hard, again, to filter out certain events. Like, for example, if you want for the Key Vault, you want to know when people touch your secrets or make changes to secrets. That's probably something you want to log and detect on, but you might not be interested in all the read operations on those secrets as well. So filtering that out was kind of hard. And now the platform logs also join the DCR model, so the data collection rule model. So now you can actually manage your Azure Resource Diagnostics from a data collection rule. And you can join the, Azure resources to data collection rule as if they were virtual machines, for example, in a similar way. And you have some pull down menus where you can say, I want these logs and I don't want these logs, certain categories to decide on. So management is much more easier. I think especially for smaller organizations which didn't use the deploy if not exist Azure policies to enforce logging on certain Azure resources, they had to go in every separate resource and enable or disable logging. This is great because now you have data collection for managing all the log stuff, and you can just join in resource groups or subscriptions, and based on the resource kind, for example, a key vault, all of the key vaults are automatically added to that data collection.
That is very cool.
I put a table.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I put a table in the show notes with some things that have changed and some options you increased, you gained. Sorry, not all resources are currently supported. Only 22 resource types are now supported in 42 regions. So they are obviously rolling this out as they are normally doing with public preview. So these are two similar but also very different announcements, but especially because they touched logging, and that's something that I care about. I thought I wanted to mention these. At first, I was a little bit confused by the announcements, actually, because if you only read the two blog headlines, you might assume they're actually the same trick, but they're not. And the blog about 94% before it leaves the box is the agent running, while the other DCR-based platform logs is agentless. It has nothing to do with the AMA agents. I wanted to highlight some of some key takeaways to end off. Like I said in the beginning, I think the 94% drop of logs is a little bit of a softball, maybe a little bit of clickbaity title. Keeping warning and everything above is something you could already do at the agent level with syslog log levels, or using the XPath selector for the Windows events. So I think severity filtering isn't really a new trick here. What is genuinely new is the client-side powers, where you can filter everything before it leaves the box. And I think, Microsoft probably could have emphasized that a little bit better in their blog, because that is actually very valuable. Also, the ingestion side transforms aren't very new. Like I said, you could create a transform KQL on your workspace, but it was quite a hassle to maintain. So I think this new approach is much more scalable. And also remember that Microsoft points out the filter before ingestion. It isn't free for everyone. So only the agent client-side path is generally never sent, never paid. But the ingestion side filtering is only an option for the agentless platform logs. Because if a log analytics workspace is not running Sentinel, and you use the transform KQL to drop more than 50% of the data, you are charged for all the data you drop. So that is a little bit of a caveat, unless you have Sentinel on top of that. So that's something to keep in mind. Yeah, and like I said, the Azure diagnostic stuff, take a look in your organization. If you still have a lot of logs sent to Azure diagnostics in general, I think it's way better to move away and use the resource-specific logging, to use your key vault specific tables, your storage account specific tables. And lastly, I want to point out data lake. A reminder, actually, I've talked about the data lake in the past. Normally it mirrors all the data that is coming into expensive analytics table and mirrors into data lake. If you don't, so obviously for storage, you pay for the cheap data lake. But if you already ingest it into analytics first and then mirror it to data lake, you're already paying a lot of money for the ingestion into the expensive storage first. If you don't want to do that, you have to move the table and set it into data lake only. And you can find it in the Defender portal. I put the exact path in the show notes. You have to go into configuration tables, then select the table, and then move the tier to data lake only. And that is when you really save the big ingestion cost. Both features are in public preview, so you can start using them right away. And again, I put some links in the show note, both the blogs accompanied with these features, but also some Microsoft Learn documentation on how to set it up and how to get started.
Yeah, very useful stuff for anyone running Azure, I guess, is this can be really helpful and beyond. So very cool. Very cool stuff. Yeah, take a look at the community project for this month. I wanted to talk a little bit about something called CA Insight. Now, I'm sure I'm going to butcher this poor guy's name, but Emilian Sochi or Soki, I think he is a Norwegian security researcher, Norwegian or Danish, but he has built this project which kind of helps you discover gaps in your conditional access policy. And I really like the approach here, and I think this is really good. So traditionally, what you would do is you might look at your sign-in logs, and then you would take a look at sign-ins that don't have an accompanying conditional access policy. And so in that way, you could try and find, gaps in your policy. But when you do that, you're being very reactive, right? Because you're first having to wait for the login to happen. And then you can find whether there's a gap. And of course, if something hasn't, if a gap isn't being misused, then it's not going to show up in your logs and you're not going to be able to find it. And so what I really like about this approach is very, very proactive in that he's essentially enumerating all of your possible access combinations, and he's doing it all offline as well. So this is a really sort of proactive way to analyze your policy. So he grabs all of the policies and stuff through Graph and all the various APIs, and then does an offline sort of analysis of everything, right? So you're not sort of hitting APIs constantly, and you can kind of get a really nice looking sort of report and dashboard of any potential holes or gaps in your conditional access policy. So I imagine most folks listening to this are using conditional access. It is a pretty widely used feature.
I hope they are.
Yes. It is something that I think should be constantly evaluated and monitored. Conditional access is not set and forget, right? It happens the changes are happening all the time. Recently now we're getting obviously agents and all these other sort of identities that we need to look at. So something you need to be looking at all the time. I think this is a really, really great tool to kind of help you make sure that you haven't got any glaring holes or gaps in your CA policies. Available at GitHub. Take a look at it, and I guess give him a like if you like what he's done, or give him a star. I guess on GitHub is what you do. So I wanted to share that. I think this is a really neat little project. So
it's a great find.
Yeah. So very cool. I think with that brings us to the end of another episode. Koos, as always, love doing this with you, my friend. A good time. Time goes so quickly when we're doing these as well, isn't it? So
that's true. Yeah. Seems like yesterday we did the other recording and That's
right.
It's really
That's
crazy.
Right. So time goes by really quickly. You're about to kick off your day. I'm about to end mine. And as always, folks, if you have any questions or comments or anything like that, please feel free to reach out to us. We're on LinkedIn and all the other socials, I guess. But, find us, contact us, anything that you would like us to focus on or anything like that, please let us know. Until next time, we will see you then. We appreciate you listening. And Koos, you have yourself a great day too.
Thanks, Chris. See you later. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Bye-bye.
Bye.